So, what is the Perpetual Analyzer? A lot of times I will hear professors say, this student has really good analysis skills but is wishy-washy, doesn't come to a strong conclusion. Here's the problem. These students have given up their biased ways of thinking. They've learned to look at problems fully. They now have problems reaching a conclusion. They tend to say, gosh, I can look at the problem this way, and I can look at it that way, and there are really good arguments on both sides. How could I possibly reach a conclusion? That's why I call this the Perpetual Analyzer. The tendency is to keep going around and around and around in circles. The key skill that is missing is the ability to establish and use a priority to say, what's most important in this situation that will help me make a decision? What they tend to do is provide lots of discussion and lots of analysis, but little or nothing on the conclusion. A lot of people call this analysis paralysis. When I reflect back on my own skills as a student, I think I was operating as a perpetual analyzer when I completed my PhD dissertation. My dissertation was way too long. One day I asked my PhD advisor why my dissertation was so much longer than everyone else's in the department. At the time, he told me that I wasn't taking the time to make it shorter. Certainly, I was trying to get done, but I don't think that was the problem. I think I was so afraid to leave out anything that I had done that it was all there. I wasn't able at that time to prioritize, to decide what was really important to include or exclude. That's the key skill that perpetual analyzers are missing. We often see this pattern of thinking among master's level students, and I think there are probably a fair number of people in the workplace operating at this stage. Here's the picture that, to me, portrays perpetual analyzer thinking. It is a spiral staircase that winds around and around and around, where you never reach the end. So let's take another opportunity now to reflect and consider how frequently we come across students or people we're working with who are perpetual analyzers. I'm now showing you the results of the poll. The distribution has shifted dramatically to the left, which, again, is consistent with the higher education research. In other words, we don't see as many people operating at this stage as we do at the earlier ones. So now let's look at the transition from perpetual analyzer to pattern 3, which I call the pragmatic performer. These students need to develop what I call step 3 skills. The big skill is to consciously prioritize issues and criteria. What is most important in this situation? I remember when I was an undergraduate student, I took an environmental course. As part of that course, I did a research study about nuclear energy. I remember really struggling because there were arguments for and there were arguments against nuclear energy. I was having trouble reaching a conclusion. And I still remember that at one point, while thinking about the paper, I suddenly realized that one of the arguments really stood out as more important to me than all of the others. I knew that the storage time for nuclear waste was very, very, very long. And I decided that I would use this one criterion, the commitment of storage for such a long period of time, with a commitment to the future of humanity. And I decided that was more important than other arguments, and that I could rely on this one criterion to reach and defend a conclusion. What I did was to prioritize by focusing in on one fairly pragmatic criterion. And this is what we often see when students begin to move past perpetual analyzer thinking. They often focus on one very practical criterion, and they consciously decide that it is more important than everything else. Once they've decided what that priority is, then they can objectively, and when I say objectively, I'm being a little free-handed, because none of us can ever be completely objective. But the idea is that to the extent we're capable, we can try to be objective. And at the same time, we can say, here's why I am recommending this particular conclusion. This is how step 3 skills work. While not denying other viewpoints and not denying the legitimacy of looking at the problem in different ways, being able to say that this one factor or this group of factors is more important than the other group of factors. And that allows us to reach a well-founded conclusion. This is the pattern of thinking where people can do this if I call the pragmatic performer.